I'm very excited about this conversation with Chloe Maxman, someone who's been writing for us for more than a decade. The question is provocative. How can a climate justice champion win in working class rural America? Someone who led the Divest Harvard campaign and won, someone who Bill McKibben thinks is a star in all the right ways, someone who wrote for our 150th anniversary issue 5 years ago. I'm 22 years old, this was 5 years ago, and I've been a climate activist for 10 years. My call is for a radical future now. Chloe Maxman is someone who is a state senator of 2 terms in the most rural state in the country, in the second most rural county, I believe, in Maine. And she has worked to find ways to bring together a phrase that, Green New Deal may not be the most appealing phrase to many people she represents, but she's found a way to make it appealing. And in this past November, she unseated the state's Republican Senate minority leader with 51% of the vote in her rural working class district 13. And 2 years earlier, in her first run for office, Chloe won a seat in Maine's lower chamber from her deep red House district, and then went on to introduce a Maine Green New Deal with the historic endorsement of the state's AFL-CIO. We were just talking in the quote green room about sort of the tensions between old traditional economies like the lobster, the fishermen, and new economies of renewables, of green, and how just transition, which many of you know about, is something Chloe, I think, is going to talk to us about and critical moving forward. The version of the Green New Deal that Chloe sponsored and introduced was, significantly pared down. Politics is often about, I don't know if Chloe thinks of it this way, the left edge of the possible, coalition building, putting forward the boldest and then accepting in some way what is doable and fighting onwards. But what she did was start a new conversation about this just transition for Maine workers that continues to influence statewide climate policy under Democratic Governor Janet Mills. So here, Chloe, 20-something, rookie state legislator, is charting in a way what it means for climate politics coast to coast. I don't know if any of you have read, if you haven't, you must, and he's on this call. Wen Stevenson did a brilliant interview with Chloe, which in many ways gave us the title, because it was the title of his piece, How Can a Climate Activist Win in Rural Maine? And, as a House representative and now senator, her work continues in, transpartisan community-based efforts to fight for a strong Maine. With one of the issues, I'm sure Chloe, I think, agrees. I remember Bill McKibben was on one of our conversations, Chloe, like you are today, and he came in from a parking lot, I believe, outside a library because he didn't have adequate broadband. And, McKibben will find adequate broadband, but the issue of rural broadband, I think, is one that unites urban and rural communities. Quality education, healthcare, transportation, and state policies designed to sustain natural resources in the future and honor the past. As I said, prior to running for office, Chloe received national, international recognition for her climate activist, including being named a Green Hero by Rolling Stone, receiving the Brower Youth Award and appearing on Real Time with Bill Maher. As I said, she's also written dozens of articles for The Nation since she was a student at Harvard, where she co-founded one of the first divestment groups. And she was our very first Student Nation Writing Fellow. One of the things we really value at The Nation is nurturing a new generation of journalists, of activists, of electeds. And we do so through the Student Nation Fellowship. We do so through our internship program, which has been underway for about 40 plus years. So one last thing I want to say about The Nation and its environmental climate emergency coverage is on the call today is also Mark Hertsgaard, our longtime environmental correspondent, who just a couple years ago helped The Nation to be a co-founder with The Guardian and CJR of a project called Covering Climate Now. And I'm sure one of the great people who's been working on the conversations, Gia maybe will put it in the stream, in the chat, But it's a project designed to deepen journalistic understanding of the climate emergency, and it spans the globe. I think about 400 media partners now, from the Times of India to the weathercasters of South Carolina. And I think this is a story Mark felt Chloe's story was one he really wanted to share with that network because it's both hopeful and very real. So Chloe, thank you for joining us today, taking time out from what your work, and we really look forward to hearing from you in these times.
Thank you so much, Katrina. I'm so excited to be here today. Both Katrina and Peter and the nation as a whole has been such a consistent presence in my life, and people who believed in the ideas before they were proven, before they became real. And that's the kind of faith and belief that I feel like is so rare in these worlds, and I'm eternally grateful for it. So thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be back in the nation space as well. It feels like a long time, and hearing that quote from when I was 22, I'm 28 now, so that was 6 years ago that I was part of that 150th celebration. Yeah, so much has changed in my life, and especially around how I view political organizing. So yes, as has been mentioned, I'm a state senator representing the Great Senate District 13, which comprises most of Lincoln County in Maine. Maine is the most rural state in the nation, and Lincoln County is tied as the most rural county in the state. Maine is also the oldest state in the nation, and Lincoln County is the oldest county in Maine. So we're a rural county with a lot of older folks, and it presents a lot of unique challenges. Lincoln County was also named by The Hill as one of the 10 counties that would decide the 2020 elections, because we're about a third, Democrat, Republican, and independent. We generally trend Republican, and our economy, our heritage is rooted in the outdoors and in the industries that have always run Maine's economy, and we're really in that point between where we've been and where we need to go. So lots of interesting stuff happened here. So my theory of change in my work right now is that progressives need to focus on rebuilding power in rural America in order to achieve the political will at the state and national level to achieve the kind of climate justice policy that we need. So I spend all my time really building political power in rural places, and everything that I do in this sphere is done with my best friend and my campaign manager, Canyon Woodward. I think he's on here today. We co-authored one of the articles that's in the chat, and we're about to publish a book that will be out next March from Beacon Press called Dirt Road Revival, about really distilling all of the lessons that we've learned from our campaigns and translating those to other rural parts of this country. So I just want to give a little bit of context on how I got to this theory of change, because it's never something that I thought I would do, certainly back when I was 22. I grew up in rural Maine on a farm. I love Maine so much. I devote my life to this beautiful state. And my whole life I've just asked myself the question, what can I do to fight for Maine? I've had different answers to that question throughout the years. In high school, I did a lot of environmental work at my public high school. At Harvard, I started Divest Harvard because I hated that Harvard was investing in ExxonMobil, which at the time was trying to build a huge tar sands pipeline through Maine. And, so that's kind of how it's gone. But all of my time in the political climate organizing space, I've noticed a couple things, and especially through fossil fuel divestment. I noticed that our movements are really good at building on the ground power. We used divestment to galvanize thousands of students to fight for climate justice. We had hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets, getting the biggest climate marches ever on record to happen. But at the same time, we weren't really building political power. So we had hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, but then the 2014 midterms happened and Republicans gained a ton of control. Throughout the Obama years, Democrats lost over 1,000 state legislative seats, which is a greater loss for a party than has happened since World War II. So something is happening where the movements that we're building are not matching the political power that we're getting. And all of this became crystal clear in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, and that our progressive values still were not influencing politics. They were starting to influence culture, but not politics. The other thing that I really noticed in 2016 is that the vast majority of the votes for Donald Trump came from conservative rural districts. And I realized that I grew up in one of those conservative rural districts. Both my House district and my Senate district voted for Trump. My House district had never been won by a Democrat before, and my Senate district consistently went Republican. And so I started to look at all of these dynamics and think about why we weren't building political power in the ways that we needed, and why rural communities like mine were being so deeply left behind. And I put the pieces together and called Canyon and was like, do you want to move to Noblesboro and launch a campaign to get me elected to the Maine State House? And he said yes. And so what followed was a whole year of campaigning to get us elected in 2018 and then again in 2020. Our work is about looking at politics, electoral organizing in a new way that brings all of the humanity and faith and hope and community of social movement organizing into the electoral space. We also focus on figuring out a new way for Democrats to campaign in rural America that can reach beyond this divide that is clearly having huge impacts and influences at the state and national levels. So, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but in both of our campaigns, I spend every day talking to Republicans and independents. I rarely talk to Democrats. And what I've learned from talking with these folks is that we don't have as much, we have more in common than we think we do. We don't have as much in different than we think we do. That was a confusing way to say that. There are hundreds of people who voted for me and who also voted for Donald Trump in 2020 and in 2016. There are people who put our lawn signs next to their Donald Trump lawn signs. We realize that there is a way forward that is built on conversations about respect and common values that can really open a door for a new type of politics that isn't focused on what makes us different. It's not focused on Democrat or Republican. It's focused on, are you listening to me? Are you respecting me? Are you understanding my experience and where I'm coming from? And that has really changed my life, how I view progressive organizing and what we need to be doing in progressive spaces to ensure that we're listening to all of these folks who have been so left behind and who are struggling just like us and who have the same frustrations with politics just like us. So I can stop there and see where Katrina wants to take us.
Come back on. Chloe, thank you. Your theory of change is really so important, and the idea of bringing the movement, social movement energy into electoral politics, I think is something that we've seen across the country, a new generation of electeds, both more nationally in Congress, but at the state level. And your diagnosis of losing all those state seats is, devastating and critical that progressives, what do you call yourself, by the way, when you meet people? Do you use a label? I'm just curious.
If asked, I say I'm a Democrat, although I usually just like to show up as a human being.
So you have a great admirer in someone, I think named George Gale of People's Action. He does a lot of rural organizing, and he does something called deep canvassing, which of course was hard to do COVID times, but to really go to a door and spend more than a minute trying to raise money, but talking to people about what moves them and give them respect and hear. I'm curious, what are what would you advise if you were, say, a member of the squad? It's a more national position, but a lot of it is also representing a region. And you are representing a region which you're speaking to and respecting. But how do you build that out across the country, maybe in more racially diverse places? and urban places? What is the trick? And I don't mean that in a crass transactional way, but what is the message of someone who's really come to power and believes in building power in a rural framework for those not in maybe more urban settings? Or should there be common issues that unite?
I think there's so many different answers to that question, and one of the biggest ones that comes to my mind is really focusing on values. I think one thing that I've learned, it's interesting because so much of what Canyon and I did, we just kind of stumbled upon because it felt natural. Like we didn't know about deep canvassing when we started our campaigns, but we realized that showing up at a door for 30 seconds and asking someone who's never had a candidate knock on their door before if they'll vote for me and then never returning is not a good way to interact with a human being, let alone to try and win a vote and that kind of trust and respect. And so, you know, when we started to understand that so many people were left out of politics and had so much to share and to say that we needed to hear, it felt natural just to stand there for 10 or 15 minutes and have a conversation and then go back and follow up. And I think that same theme is echoed in how we try and build out movements that can expand beyond rural or
Right.
oh my goodness, urban or rural, or that can expand beyond identity and geography. And so one of the things that we discovered that has been backed up through our research writing this book is that we need to focus on values. So often we take our values and we put them into these policy vehicles, and the policy vehicles get taken up by parties or candidates and they become really divisive. So one example that I use a lot is that every single person I talk to, no matter their party affiliation, they want affordable and accessible healthcare. But if I go out there talking about Medicare for all, there's not even a conversation to be had. Or if we're talking about climate change, I can talk about how I want to go ice fishing every winter like I have growing up, or we want to go snowmobiling every winter, or the lakes are getting too warm, or the oceans are getting too warm and the lobsters are moving north. If we talk about climate change in that way in my community, we can have a conversation. We might not label it climate change, but we're talking about what's happening to our environment. So similarly, if I go in saying we need a Green New Deal to inject billions of dollars in our economy to ensure a just transition, that sounds really good. It aligns with our values, but it's not. It's been co-opted in ways that don't fit in my community. So we really focus on stripping back down to our values and building relationships based on those values. I think everything's gone so complicated and so loaded that it's really the only way that we can figure out to build relationships that have meaning and potential.
Thank you, Chloe. Meaning and potential. I like that. I'm going to ask Erin, who is in Maine, in fact, as we speak, to begin with the questions, many of them coming in fast and furious. But thank you for being with us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We do have some questions from the audience. And I have a question, and I wonder if where we can start, because I feel like it's a case study for a lot of things that are going on right now. For people who don't know, Maine has, and Chloe, you're going to be better at explaining this than I am, but Maine has a plan to put a wind array off the coast, and the lobster fishermen are against it. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what's going on there, because it's very interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting. So there's an island off the coast of Maine called Monhegan, which is in my Senate district. And about a decade ago, there was a plan in conjunction with the University of Maine to use some of the water off the coast of Monhegan to put in a test array of wind turbines to begin to see what. Oh no, my phone is ringing. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so to put a few turbines out there and to see what Maine's offshore wind future could look like. And through a variety of different events, it's now turned from a test array into a full-on project, and they're trying to run a cable to connect this array into Booth Bay, Maine, which is also in my district. And so I'm very much enmeshed in this conversation right now. So the challenge is that this patch of ocean is the livelihood for hundreds of Maine lobstermen and fishermen. A lot of these fishermen, they go along the ground to get tons of shrimp and fish and all this kind of stuff, and they're going to put this massive cable on the ground, right through the Gulf of Maine. So the fishermen are really scared right now because they're freaking out, understandably, that their livelihood is going to disappear, and that this project could be precedent setting, and that there would be other turbine projects like this all across the coast of Maine. On the other hand, the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. Our lobster industry is dwindling because the waters are too warm. The lobsters are moving north. So we need to be focused on renewable energy, and we got a lot of offshore wind potential here. So it's become a really interesting case study in my mind for what a just transition means. That we need to be transitioning to renewable energies in ways that don't disproportionately impact the people who can least afford it. So in my opinion, the way that Maine is going about offshore wind development does not embody a just transition mentality. We are displacing fishermen, we are jeopardizing livelihoods. And so I think the process has been really destructive. Our governor just put in a 10-year moratorium on offshore wind developments in Maine to try and slow down this process a little bit and get more input from the fishermen. But it still doesn't stop the fact that this wind array is going up pretty quickly, and it's all happening right now. So a very lively discussion in Maine. There is a bill in to ban all future offshore wind development that we'll have to vote on at some point. So it's really big and it's really important, and yeah, it's scary.
Thank you. I have a few questions. So Cindy asks, so I guess broadly, and this goes back to probably just transition, and then your point about bringing humanity to the electoral process. She asks, how about saving our planet? Why doesn't the GOP get that? And then she also asks, how do you start a conversation with rural Republicans?
Yeah. Well, I think first, just like there's many different people within the Democratic Party, there are lots of different folks within the GOP. And so, I don't want to paint everyone with a broad brush. I'm working on some pretty big environmental legislation right now in Maine, and I'm working with a lot of Republicans and talking with them almost more than I talk with my Democratic colleagues. So really want to stand up for them and the work that a lot of Republicans are doing. I think that, I'll just speak from my experience in Maine, because I don't want to generalize, but when I show up at the door of someone who has a Trump flag out or Trump bumper stickers, or I love, my favorite one are the signs that say, prayer is a great way to meet the Lord, but trespassing will get you there faster, with a picture of a gun. You're just like a little freaked out when you're walking up to these places. And I think, and I live in a pretty poor community too. So I go and knock on doors of, trailers in the back of the woods by myself. And in myself, I feel all of these preconceptions about what, what's this person going to say? What are they going to do? Are they going to be angry at me? Are they going to yell at me? Are they actually going to point a gun at me? What's going to happen? And I think the same way that I have all those notions of someone who voted for Trump in my head, they have the same notions of what a Democrat is. So one story that I'll share to try and show how we've broken this down a little bit is in 2018, we had a really big discussion in Maine around Medicaid expansion. Our former governor did not expand Medicaid, so there were 70,000 Mainers who weren't getting health care. And we had just elected a new governor who had finally put it into place, but it was a really big deal. And so I walked up to this guy's house. He was in his garage working on his snowmobiles. And he was like, do you believe in Medicaid expansion? And I was like, I do. And he was like, you can leave now. And at first I thought he was like, we're on the same page, no worries. And you don't have to waste your time here. But it didn't take me too long to realize that he was really pissed at me and wanted me to get off his property. And I was so stunned at how quickly this dynamic changed that I was like, wait, what just happened there? Can you tell me what you're thinking and what's going on? And he was so surprised that a Democrat, I mean, he said this to me, so surprised that a Democrat didn't just judge that reaction from him, that he started to tell me how he grew up in the house that he currently lived in, but at that time it had no electricity or running water. He's worked hard for everything that he's had in his whole life, and he buys his own healthcare. He doesn't believe in public healthcare. He believes in self-sufficiency and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And so that's why he was against Medicaid expansion. And that was really, I mean, it was really interesting to me to hear that perspective, and to understand that feeling of working so hard for something. But at the same time, it also showed the power of just not assuming, and just letting your guard down a little bit. There's another story that I'll tell quickly of down at the end of a long dirt road, there was a trailer, and it had curtains over all the windows, like everything was shut. So I couldn't see what was going on. And I knocked on the door, and all this smoke poured out, and I could see it was really dark inside, but this guy had like kind of armor everywhere and swords on the walls. And it was really weird and really freaky. And I was like, okay, this is where I die out here. But this guy was so kind and told me that no one had ever taken the time to knock on his door before, that people just judged what his house looked like. And he was so grateful and voted for me and kept my phone number. And we talk all the time now and just, chit chat about our dogs. So that's just a long way of saying that I think, just the prejudice and the bias is deep in all of us, whether it's around race or any form of identity. And sometimes you just gotta, I don't know, put it aside.
Thank you. We have a question from Alana Cohen, who I believe might be your predecessor at DeVest Harvard. Hey, Chloe, I'm curious how you balance a very progressive national image or reputation as a progressive climate justice leader in broader public circles with your identity as more of an issue and value-based elected official, not focused on political labels, not labeling yourself as progressive back home. Do those identities ever come into tension in either space?
Hi, Alana. Such a great question. So in 2018, when I first ran, I had a primary at first, and we have closed primaries in Maine. So I spent my first couple months of candidating, talking to Democrats only. And it was like so easy, not super challenging. It felt challenging at the time, but the conversations were easy. We won the primary with 80% of the vote. And then after that, to win our general election, we needed 80% of Democrats and 60% of voting Republicans and independents to support us. And so that's a lot. My House district had a 16% Republican advantage. And so I went off and I talked with Republicans and independents, like really hardcore folks. And when I first started that process, I did feel like my identities were clashing. I had conversations with people where I just heard stuff that it was just so not in line with, I feel like it's too vulgar to even say in this space right now. I just heard stuff that was so shocking to me that I couldn't believe it. Like one moment was, I was having a great conversations with these people. We were talking about like how it's important to go snowmobiling on public lands, and then they just veered off in another direction. And they were saying that they thought it was okay that children were separated from their parents at the border because if you do something illegal, you're punished for it. And if a citizen does something illegal and goes to jail, then they're separated from their kids. So it makes sense that at the border that children would be separated from their parents. And just this stuff I had no idea how to respond to. And I felt like I was betraying my values by not standing up to that. But the more that I kind of delved into that world, the more that I realized that the more that I learned how to fight back and confront some of those narratives, but I also began to realize that the way that I was organizing as a progressive was leaving out a lot of people who I actually had a lot in common with. If it wasn't around policy, we had a lot of common values around being frustrated with government, not feeling represented. And I could never access that if I didn't just listen. And so by listening, I found our common values and I felt like we were aligned. And there's so many times when I'm in, I was doing a Bioneers thing earlier this year or late last year, and someone just started to talk. Someone said that everyone who voted for Trump was a neo-Nazi or something like that. And I was like, that's not true. Like, I know people who voted for Trump. They're my neighbors. They're people who voted for me. And I think there's a lot of work that we have to do in our own progressive space to redefine our own values. Like, if we're really inclusive, then why are we leaving out all of these people who do have a lot in common with us just because they voted for Donald Trump? So all of that's to say that I think my own identity is evolving, so I don't feel that far apart. And I do a lot of work in both spaces to try and push back against some of the more destructive stuff that just is built to tear us apart.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions in the chat about, I guess, about the process, your process. So the deep listening you're doing. And it is a really active and interested audience, and I'm sure they can put a lot of these things to use. So I wonder if you could dig in a little bit deeper. So Laura is saying, good organizing has always been about building relationships, listening, trust, and respect. That's not new. My question is about how to deal with the way white folks have always been taught to blame others for their problems, immigrants, people of color. How do you deal with that? So how do you deal with the othering now?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's something that I'm just going to carry my computer over here to shut my phone off for a second. I forgot to do that before. I'm sure all of you can relate to phones just making noise all the time. Yes. Yeah, it's something that I've honestly really struggled with because I'm answering questions with stories, but I remember knocking on the door of this woman who was, I don't know, like in her late 60s. She was just on her way to work, and people like to take their issues out on politicians, which is okay. But she's just started going at it to me about how she's worked her whole life and she can't afford to retire, and her body hurts, and she's still going to work, and she's going to have to move out of her house because she can't afford it anymore. And why do all these immigrants get all these benefits when she's worked hard for her life and she still hasn't gotten what she's deserved and what she's been promised in society? So in that story, I'm not 60 years old and still working, but I can certainly sympathize with how awful and frustrating that situation is, and that anger and that sense of being let down is so understandable, and it's so much of what I feel as a young person. At the same time, my solution is not that some people should get resources and some people shouldn't. The reason why I'm a Democrat is because I believe that everyone has access to the same resources and that we shouldn't be pitting people against each other. And so that's the narrative that I come back with, and when people ask me why I'm a Democrat, which happens all the time, that's what I say. And because I don't see the Republicans putting forward that kind of narrative. They are very divisive. So that's what I say. But I say that with empathy for the frustration, and I also so agree that with your analysis, Laura, about how we're taught to blame people, so that we're just holding tighter and tighter onto what we have and unwilling to share or let go. And I think the only way to try and confront some of that is by talking to people and building real relationships and trying to change perspectives a little bit, and ultimately electing people who are going to put forth policies that can try and shift the structure of our society so that we're not being pit against each other. And I think that's one of the powers of local politics, is having these smaller races where you can go talk to people every 2 years. That certainly does not happen with a congressional race or a presidential race. And if it does, it happens in really targeted, icky, extractive ways. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. We're going to ask a question about organizing first for the old folks and then for the young folks. Ann Martin says, are there ways in which we as older Americans can ally with young Americans to make positive change that some of us have been working for a long time? Sometimes it feels as if those of us who are old get discounted as part of the needed change agents.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we all work together and give each other space for our own experiences. So, like, one dynamic that we've run into in our races is kind of watching the people who have come before us and acknowledging that intentions are good, but that we're trying to figure out a different way to do this. So when folks who have campaigned here before who are older come to us and be like, no, these are the doors that you need to knock on, and we're actually like, no, I think we're going to go knock on these doors. It's not an insult at all. It's just us bringing a different perspective to it, which is what makes the world go round and what makes democracy function. And certainly in our campaigns, we have made lots of space and intentional effort to bring in elders and people who are wiser than us to help guide our work. I'm part of a lot of interesting groups here in Maine that are trying to create healthier relationships between adult allies and younger folks, because I think that dynamic is real, that younger folks just kind of want to like go out and do their thing, and adult allies feel like their experience is really left out and discounted. And so I'm part of this one group, the Maine Environmental Education Association, that looks at these relationships through a mutual mentorship model. So saying that young people can teach older folks, which is something that that power isn't usually given to young folks, just as older folks can teach younger folks. And so trying to equalize the relationships a little bit and take out some of that power that is embedded on both sides. And so I think that's really important and something that we try and integrate into our work as well.
Okay, and now a question from Alana, the nation's own incredible intern. She writes, how can student activism become more integrated with the local community members in which students' schools are located? What does a good partnership as a student activist with other more locally rooted activist groups look like? And relatedly, what can it look like to maintain the momentum of student organizing after a student graduates?
Oh, I don't know, with the great questions today. Yeah, these are such interesting questions that I've thought about a lot. And, I think just to put one general principle out there is always following the lead of the people who live in the community. And, I think there's some schools in Maine that are like Bates College in Maine is in Lewiston, which has one of the highest immigrant populations in the state. And so there's a lot of tensions between this pretty white elite college and this community that has a lot of racial tension and a lot of poverty and a lot of homelessness. And so there's a lot of amazing organizing happening at Bates that's rooted in the community itself through local organizations. And I think that's a really interesting model. And so we don't make a full-time salary in Maine as state legislator. So one of my other jobs is we're trying to build up a new structure that's trying to get at exactly what you're talking about, Alana. It's called Just Me for Just Us. And what we're doing is organizing in rural parts of the state that are very much overlooked when it comes to climate organizing. And we're trying to build relationships in communities around schools and around young folks to ensure that young folks have the tools that they need to do campaigning and organizing in their community, and to have them be housed in a structure that has paid staff that's all young people, so that when these students graduate, that there is a place with the institutional knowledge of this work that goes beyond the student who's graduating. So that's one of our explicit purposes. And then our other explicit purpose is to translate this young folks' interest in community change towards civic engagement. So doing like a lot of voter education, issue education around candidates and all that kind of stuff. So trying to bridge all of those things together through an outside organization that's run by young folks. And I think another key part of that is we have a very explicit commitment to paying everyone that we work with. So if you're running a project in Millinocket, Maine, we're going to stipend you. If you're in Machias, Maine, which is another really rural community, and you want $500 to help get your project off the ground, we're going to come in and help you get those resources. So this is one of my side projects that I'm really excited about, because I think access in rural places is the conversation is always about access more than anything else.
Thank you. Your message of how to communicate is really resonating with the group. And we have another question. This is from Grace. Can you give specific examples of dialogue that combines deep listening and fighting back?
Yes. Okay. So give me a second here. I definitely learned this skill more in 2020 than I did in 2018. I can't, a specific story isn't coming to mind, but I know some of the things that I would say a lot, which were when I started to hear this pitting narrative where, this anti-immigrant, why don't I have anything and other people are getting something? When I hear that, the line that I used a lot this year or last year was that I think everyone should have access to the same resources, and that we shouldn't have to be fighting over it. There's enough money in this country for everyone to be happy. So I use that line a lot, and that always resonated with folks. I don't think I ever got a bad reaction to that. I also, I did canvass during COVID. I think we were the only Democrat in the state to do so for many months, but I had a lot of conversations with people about Black Lives Matter, because it was as everyone knows, last year with all the horrific stuff that happened. And I had a lot of fascinating conversations with people about that. And I often found myself saying that, trying to like give a little bit more empathy for the Black experience. I'm not Black, but, I tried to do the best that I could to people that I was talking to, and like where that anger is coming from, and why people are tearing down statues, and why people are in the streets. And people in my community had a lot of issues watching businesses get burned down, because they run small businesses, and they're like, that's disrespectful of someone's hard work. And then I could come back and say, well, it's actually like mostly white people who did stuff like that, and you can't blame people of color who have been persecuted in this country for centuries, for something, for that one action of that one white person who burned a business. And so I found myself saying a lot of stuff like that as well, to the best of my ability. But it was also, I found really interesting to hear how people perceived the Black Lives Matter movement. And it often had to do with watching businesses get burned down or tearing down statues. People's main objection to that was that someone donated money for that statue to go up, and that it was like disrespectful of that person's hard work and wealth to tear it down. And so then I remember one time when I was like, well, it makes sense that you would tear something down if it represented your history of oppression and how your people have been persecuted. And so I don't know, conversations like that happened a lot, and I do need to do a lot more work in navigating those dynamics. Are very, very tricky for me, feeling both sides of.
Erin, could I ask a quick question?
Of course.
As a media institution, I'm interested in your constituents. What are they reading, watching? I'm just curious about, and I'm interested in your sense of the coverage of rural America. It's a broad question, but the rural America, when you look out at different media, what's your sense?
Fox News all the way. I had one crazy moment this summer where I was knocking on doors and people were talking about what was happening in Seattle. And I mean, I read, Guardian, New York Times. I read the papers every day, and my social media, of course. And I hadn't heard a thing about Seattle. And I was like, where are, like, multiple people were talking about Seattle. And I went home that night and I looked up. I went on foxnews.com, front page was talking about how when protesters in Seattle created their own little zone, and Fox News was covering it in a very anti-protester, pro-police way. And I was like, okay, this is where it's coming from. And I had checked Fox News regularly, but now I read it every day, and it's crazy. It's so crazy how it'll be on Fox News, and then that day at the doors, I'll hear it, even if it's not covered the same way in any other media source. So that's freaky. We also, in my community, we have the Lincoln County News, which everyone reads every week. And so it's this weird combination of having the conservative media being really prominent, but also if I get 10 letters to the editor in the paper, people will talk about that as well. So there's still like little glimmers of hope to change how the media influences these conversations.
How would you like to see media cover I mean, it's a big question, but rural issues, rural America, rural.
Yeah, I think, oh man.
I know that we should have you write something. It would be interesting. I didn't mean we should ask you to write something. Senator Maxman.
I mean, I think my experience of it is a lot of the coverage of rural America is pretty objectifying and kind of extractive of the experience in rural places, and not giving space to share some of these stories in all their complexity, like acknowledging that white privilege is part of these stories, for example, even though the frustration is really that folks are experiencing is really valid. And I don't think that all of that is being teased out enough. So so acknowledging all the privilege that comes from a lot of folks in rural areas. Rural folks don't see their stories reflected in larger media as well. And democratic policies, progressive policies, are not built for rural places. I find myself voting against them all the time in Augusta because they work for Portland, Maine, but they don't work for Noblesboro, Maine. So, our whole identity is kind of skewed towards urban audiences, which makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways, but is leaving behind a whole narrative that is gaining a lot of political traction.
Thank you.
We have a lot more questions. I should just take a moment to tell you that people are joining us from all over the country. To name a few: Florida, Kentucky, California, Washington, New York, Massachusetts. So thank you for sharing your experience with such an incredible audience. And we have a question from Ireland. Patrick Scullion says, I'm watching from Northern Ireland, a deeply divided society, which is only getting worse so for obvious geopolitical reasons. We watch your progress with great interest and hope. I'm so interested in how you're tackling disinformation and epistemic chaos on the ground and in the political ecosystem. We're so interested in your movement and incredible work also of your mother. So shout out to your mom. Keep fighting. Thank you. So how are you tackling disinformation?
Well, thank you for those kind words. It was very, very, very kind. And thank you for coming today. Disinformation. Yeah, tricky. I mean, I think, I think one thing that I often own about myself is I'm incapable of lying, as my family can tell you. So I can't show up to someone's door and just tell them what they want to hear and keep a straight face. And so I tell people that, and I think when you're face to face, you have a better sense of if someone's messing with you or not. I think I often can use, this is not a great solution, but since I am a legislator and was a legislator while campaigning in 2020, I could often use that and kind of my access, that position gave me access to some some knowledge and analysis that I wouldn't have had if I wasn't a legislator, and I could stand on that and say, well, I'm actually a legislator, and this is my experience of what happened here. I think also owning that I don't have the objective truth on everything that happens, but just being pretty radically honest about my analysis of a situation can create some trust between us that allows for information to be absorbed in like maybe a kinder, more empathetic way. But yeah, it's a huge problem right now, and I don't have a good answer except just show up and be kind and talk to people.
Erica asks, how would you frame defund the police for your more conservative constituents? Is the defund the police slogan counterproductive? And what framing or messaging would work better to achieve the same goal?
Yes, so this is what I say, and what I believe as well. So the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, our like in a lot of people, the our Lincoln County Sheriff is amazing. His name's Todd Brackett. He's a Democrat. He endorsed me. He did a video with me. He's amazing. And the sheriff's office does a lot of work beyond just law enforcement in our community. They do things like they go in and check in on seniors who don't have a family. They do phone calls and drive by their house and make sure everything's okay. They do a lot of work around the opioid crisis and substance use management, and they're facing intense challenges in their world right now, but they have really good values and are trying to do the best that they can and are a community service. So that kind of law enforcement is very different from some of the glimpses that we get into law enforcement in more urban places and in more diverse places as well. Maine is super white. My district is incredibly white, so we don't encounter some of those dynamics. And so I think the conversation around defunding the police has come from those kinds of like horrific scenes that we've seen and all these awful things that have happened. And it's a conversation that we have to pay attention to, but I don't think it translates exactly onto the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, for example. I think, we're doing a lot of work in Maine right now, mostly at the state level, to defund some of the ways that we criminalize substance use disorder and mental health services, and to shift that money into treatment and prevention. There's, so if you're a juvenile in Maine right now who's arrested or has intense mental health struggles, you are sent to this place called Long Creek. And so you're sent to jail, and it's really hard to get out of that jail. And so one of the things that we're trying to do in our budget in Maine this session is to defund Long Creek and to take those millions of dollars and put it into mental health and substance use support services. So that's kind of how I think about it. I don't think that defunding the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office would be a good idea, but I think that there are larger ways that we can talk about this and actually move money around that make a big difference, but don't jeopardize this this different form of law enforcement in rural communities. And especially during COVID, I've done a lot of COVID relief work, and the sheriff's office, they're amazing. And at least these local sheriffs don't deserve to be targeted in the same way.
Thank you. I think, that's not how the progressives always don't think of that from a rural perspective, and that's really important. So thank you. I have a question back to climate change and protecting the environment. Have any national environmental groups been working effectively on the ground in Maine? Do groups like Greenpeace, 350, Sunrise, the Sierra Club have significant footprints?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. The Sierra Club has a pretty big presence in Maine, but it's focused in southern Maine, and they got a reputation for being more progressive. And I find that with a lot of the environmental groups in Maine, that they do a lot of good work. I mean, we have Sunrise and 350 here, but they're doing a lot of good work, but they're not reaching into this space that we've unlocked with our campaigns. So I do some work with them. They're not good messengers, for our campaign. So I think we were endorsed by Sunrise, but we didn't, Sunrise Maine, but we didn't put it on any of our campaign materials. So we encounter dynamics like that a lot. I think it points to the need for organizations that are coming out of these more rural conservative contexts, so that, Jane Cleave is an amazing example of this in Bold, Nebraska, which maybe some of you know about, but just having spaces where the same values are just expressed, manifested, translated in a different way. And that's part of why we started this Just Me for Just Us project, because all of the environmental climate organizing in Maine is focused in southern urban Maine, and not translating, not being received well beyond. So it's a tricky thing, because that's where all the money is. That's where they have the staff and the support, the capacity to do the organizing that they need. But I can't walk around with those names attached to my candidacy. So tricky dynamics.
Thanks. I think we have time for at least one more question before we turn it back to Katrina. So you've introduced the Green New Deal bill. How did Governor Mills respond, and is she a possible climate ally?
Governor Mills, yes, I might not comment on Governor Mills right now, but I think, so Governor Mills did sign my Green New Deal bill into law. It was significantly pared down for a whole bunch of reasons that my mom said, don't say anything bad about someone. I can't even remember the saying. I'm sure we all know what it is. But I think, I don't.
Well, you know what?
I don't want to be mean or say anything.
No, of course not. We have a question from Mark Hertzgaard, and I'll just ask that and then turn it to Katrina. He says, Chloe, it's so impressive what you and your team have accomplished in Maine. Can you tell us what kind of reaction you may have gotten from the Democratic Party at both the state and local level about what they might learn from your example last November?
We get a lot of feedback from the Democratic Party. Part of, they do a lot of incredible work supporting candidates. I mean, the House Dems are supporting 151 candidates across the state. The Senate Dems support 35 candidates. They do a lot of work, but that work is not geared towards supporting candidates in rural places. We don't have enough time for me to go into how much we've struggled with the Democratic Party. One quick anecdote that I could say is that when we were crafting our canvassing universe, the people that we were going to talk to, they told us straight up, we do not talk to Republicans. So we've done a lot of work on pushing back against that narrative, trying to figure out how to do it ourselves. And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about in our book, is how you can do it yourself too. And you can have a good relationship with the party, but a strong campaign does not start and end with the Democratic Party.
Chloe, I want to echo my colleague, Mark Hertzgaard. It's been an extraordinary hour. I love how you closed with the note about your mother, because what I think you've been today is so honest. There's such a genuine honesty, which you don't get a lot from politicians. And also, your humanity and empathy. Title of your book, Forgive, so everyone can get it.
Dirt Road Revival.
Dirt Road Revival.
March 29th, 2022.
Okay, great. And, just thank you for sharing your very illuminating ideas about change and how you're building power. And I wondered if when you spoke about a new kind of economy, I-Gen Poo has written for us about a caring economy. And I think that's going to be more part of the Democrats' attempt to kind of say, we want to improve the condition of people's lives, and that there's a pragmatism there. So I hope everyone get Chloe's book and join us for a very different kind of event. April 7th at 6 p.m., the nation is sponsoring a mayoral forum. That would be New York City, mayoral forum with many of the leading candidates. And I think it's going to be, I think we have some questions based on this conversation with you, Chloe, for that event. And I think access and respect are ideas that we should all take with us. Your story about media is a little sobering, but we're going to find ways to continue to cover. And we have covered you and Kleb, and all these voices are so critical to opening up a new dialogue, which you are at the head of. So thank you very much. I love the call from someone in Northern Ireland, looking at our country, so divided. If Northern Ireland can find a way, anyway. But thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you all. Thank you, Aaron and Peter Rothberg and Alana and Gia and Sarah. And thank you, Mark. And thank you, Wen, who had to leave, for that brilliant interview with Chloe. Anyway, onward.
Thank you so much.